If you are enjoying and learning as much today as I am, will you please thank our Joint Commission staffs for the excellent agendas that they have put together? And we hope, that's one, and we hope you'll enjoy our time together well into your evening. I would mention, if you look at the location and directions, the reception put on by WTS is only a couple of 100 yards from here at the beautiful San Jose City Hall. It's not back at the Fairmont. If you go to the Fairmont, I'm sure you'll have a lovely time, but you won't be with us. So again, it's at City Hall. That's announcement 2. Announcement 3 is tomorrow morning we will be celebrating the success of investment in California with the future BART to San Jose extension at the future Berryessa station. Thank you, Alex Bockelman, for all the work of MTC on that as well. And that's from 10 to 11:30. It takes about 20 to 25 minutes to travel there, so please build that in. But we do a lot of things well. We don't celebrate that well. So we're going to take a moment before the commission meeting and celebrate a huge success in transportation that's coming with the wonderful BART extension and system. The final thing, we had these 3 innovation presentations earlier that are really great game changers. We'll have 2 more tomorrow from 2 more regional Silicon Valley companies that are doing game-changing innovation in technology and transportation. So as a small gift to our commission colleagues from Washington and their staff, as well as to my own colleagues, we are also giving you today a copy of a booklet we do each year called Game Changers, which is 20 op-eds, 500 words or less, from notable names like the CEO of Cisco, John Chambers, one of the CEOs that we'll hear from tomorrow, Zia Youssef of Streetline, also public sector leaders like Nancy Pelosi and others, on something that they're doing that they think is a game changer over the next 12 months. So we want to make sure you have a copy of that as well. So with those 4 announcements out of the way, this is going to be a wonderful panel because our economies are less and less nations and states solely. They are regional economies and need good transportation networks. And so we have imposed upon our very own Alex Bockelman from here in the region with our Metropolitan Transportation Commission, as well as Paul Parker from the Washington State Transportation Commission to present to us. Have you 2 flipped a coin, thumb wrestled? Who would like to go first? Great. Excellent. And if we could have your remarks each no more than about 15 minutes, that will allow us a full 15 minutes for conversation with you. And again, I'll try to be a helpful steward of the time. I'll just let you know when you have 2 minutes left. And thank you both.
Great. Good morning, Commissioners. Again, my name is Alex Bockelman, and I'm with the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. That's the MPO for the 9-county Bay Area that you're sitting in today, one of the great counties of Santa Clara. The Bay Area is home to 7 million people in terms of the MPO that I work for. It's hard to make regional planning as sort of sexy as autonomous vehicles, but we'll give it a shot, right? So in terms of just kicking it off, probably like Washington State, California is working in sort of a complex environment where we have certain planning requirements at the federal level, certain requirements at the state level, and then also certain responsibilities at the regional level. Most notably that I'm going to talk about is the Sustainable Communities and Climate Protection Act, which we call SB 375. I think that's really quite key in this discussion, and then also what's coming online, the MAP 21 performance measures. So really the challenge is trying to integrate regional, state, and federal efforts in this planning context. And for the benefit of those from Washington State, I just wanted to sort of put up a map here of California and give you a sense of the different agencies and sort of the planning context of who's working on this. We have 58 counties in California. We have 18 metropolitan planning organizations, 26 regional transportation planning agencies, and we also have 12 Caltrans districts. As MTC is an RTPA and an MPO, most of my remarks today will really highlight the responsibilities of agencies that share this role. To start with, one of the important roles that the California Transportation Commission plays is to adopt statewide guidelines for regional transportation plans in California. And these guidelines take into account federal and state requirements. And they were last updated in 2010 to reflect the Sustainable Communities Act and Climate Protection Act, which we call SB 375. And really the idea of these guidelines is to ensure an integrated statewide multimodal plans, achieve a uniform framework for planning throughout the state, ensure that we have continuous, comprehensive, and cooperative process, and ensure that planning really takes into account the views of all the different stakeholders. So I think in terms of the current regional planning context, what really sort of kicked off where we are today was AB 32, state legislation, the Global Warming Solutions Act of 2006. So what this did, it was a broad multi-sector regulatory legislation that requires California to achieve a 30% reduction in GHGs in 2020 compared to business as usual. The California Air Resources Board was charged with really implementing AB 32 and developed a scoping plan that requires GHG emission reductions from various activities. And 2 years later, we had SB 375, which is the Sustainable Communities and Climate Protection Act. And this directs CARB, the Air Resources Board, to develop passenger vehicle GHG reduction targets for California's 18 metropolitan planning organizations. It requires the regional transportation plans to address the targets through an integrated but constrained land use and transportation planning process that we call Sustainable Communities Strategies. SB 375 also requires current state-mandated local general plan housing elements to be consistent with the first period of these long-range regional transportation plans. SB 375 also allows for some state environmental streamlining for projects that are consistent with the sustainable community strategies. So just to give you a sense of sort of the challenge here in California, we have a much higher percentage of GHG emissions that are from transportation, about 40%, as compared to the rest of the world, which about 14% come from transportation. So AB 32 and SB 375 really set forth a three-pronged strategy for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And the first is really, the first prong is a cleaner fleet. And the second requires cleaner fuels. And the third is really sort of where regional planning comes in, is building more sustainable communities. And as you can see from this slide, the cleaner fleet and fuels really are to account for a larger reduction in greenhouse gas emissions over time. That doesn't mean the sustainable community strategies aren't important, but I just wanted to put that in perspective. SB 375 does require regional agencies to plan to house all of the workers in the region and not assume that there's in-commuting into the region. So really we need to be able to provide the housing at all income levels for those that are going to work within the region. At the same time, we need to, we're required to meet federal requirements, so we need to work with a reasonable anticipated funding envelope in accomplishing this. And we also need to be mindful of the fact that, that we cannot interfere with local land use authority. So as you can see, the sustainable community strategies are definitely a delicate dance in trying to achieve these different outcomes. So just in terms of how the process has changed for regional planning under SB 375, in the past, it was more of a sequential process where the state doles out the housing allocations, that's sort of an input into the plan, and then the transportation agencies does their long-range transportation plan. Now under SB 375, it's really much more integrated in terms of doing the housing allocation at the same time as the long-range plan to make sure that all this comes together and we can achieve the greenhouse gas emission reduction targets that we're required to meet under SB 375. And the result is really a stronger alignment between the region's transportation investments and local jurisdictions' willingness to plan and build more housing in areas that are well served by transit. So one of the important parts leading into the regional plans that have been developed throughout the state were that the California Air Resources Board established a regional targets advisory committee to develop a methodology for setting the GHG emission targets for the 18 MPOs. And the main issues that they were confronting at the time were, should there be uniform targets in all the areas? Should it be based on gross emissions, or should it be per capita? And what should be the base year for comparison? So they sort of struggled with this. They landed on statewide. They ultimately, there was some support for statewide uniform targets, but ultimately they went to custom targets since there were so many different demographic differences between larger MPOs, smaller MPOs, faster growing areas, slower growing areas. And for those same reasons, CARB also used per capita targets. And lastly, they set a 2005 base year. This slide really just shows the targets that were set in 2010 that really guided the region's development of the sustainable community strategies. And what it shows is for these 5 areas in California, by 2020 they needed to achieve somewhere between a 5 and 7% or 5 and 8% reduction in per capita emissions, and by 2035 between 10 and 16% reduction. So turning to a case study of the Bay Area and sort of the regional task under SB 375, really we had 3 things we were trying to accomplish. We needed to reduce GHG emissions from driving. We needed to make sure we were housing the region's population at all income levels. And we needed to support a strong economy, healthy environment, and social equity. So this graphic depicts the 3-year planning process that we went through to do our sustainable community strategy. We had multiple rounds of scenarios, we had multiple rounds of public comments and extensive public workshops. We also had an extensive equity analysis that went with looking at our plan, and also a performance assessment process. And in California, which may be different from, I think is different from Washington, we are required to take our preferred scenario and alternatives through the environmental review process. We had over 600 written comments submitted on our environmental impact report. And finally, after 250 public meetings, our commission did approve our Plan Bay Area, which is our sustainable community strategy, in July of 2013. One of the important things within Plan Bay Area, again, was we used the 3E framework of economy, environment, and equity to adopt 15 individual performance targets that we used to evaluate the overall plan and scenarios as well as individual projects. This was a robust process that greatly informed the decision-making of our commission. We're hoping to use the same framework with hopefully just minor updates the next time we do this. We think it was really important, the year-long process that we spent to develop these targets and keeping them somewhat limited so that it could be understandable and not sort of get lost with too many performance measures. So in terms of, as we're developing the plan, each plan we do, it's a work in progress. We do this every 4 years based on federal requirements. But, this was kind of a game changer, to use an earlier term, in terms of SB 375. But we were building on some pretty key fundamentals that we had started within the region. One is definitely fix it first. I mean, the Bay Area is a very built-out region. We have significant infrastructure. We put 88% of our money just to maintain the infrastructure we have. Another significant policy that we had in place from about a decade ago is a TOD policy that helps to ensure that our transit expansion investments are supported by appropriate land uses. So we condition regional funding for transit on jurisdictions having appropriate land uses around the stations. And another important effort, which was led with all 4 regional agencies here in the Bay Area, was a focus initiative which identified sort of where we wanted development to occur in the region and where we didn't want development to occur. And through this process, we identified priority development areas where we wanted development to occur and priority conservation areas where we really wanted to preserve the open space. And that PDA-PCA framework was really sort of a fundamental building block of our sustainable community strategy. So again, this PDA framework really guided the growth forecast for Plan Bay Area. The PDAs in our plan account for 80% of the new homes and 60% of the new jobs forecasted in the region over the next 25 years, but only take up 5% of the land area. So this focused growth was essential to the region being able to meet its greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. It also allows the region to preserve and protect open space, which is very near and dear to the hearts of people that live here. So in terms of the transportation investment side, this 25-year plan forecast that we'll have about $300 billion to spend on transportation investments. The plan proposes to invest 88% of that just to maintain the infrastructure we have. About 63% of the money will be spent on transit, with the remaining going to highway, local roads, and bridges. A really important part of the plan is investing in communities, again, to sort of make sure that we're backing up this connection between land use and transportation. Our plan launched a new program that we called One Bay Area Grant that provides transportation funding as a reward for jurisdictions that plan and build housing near transit. This grant program knits together the various pieces of SB 375 by encouraging housing near transit, investing in transportation infrastructure that serve those areas that are taking on most of the housing and the growth, and requires local jurisdictions to have state-approved housing elements. So we're really trying to bring it all together and sort of put the money there to reward these efforts. Another strong investment area for Plan Bay Area is in transit. With the plan targeting so much of the growth in these priority development areas, the transit system is going to be fundamental to making the sustainable community strategy a success. So shortly after adopting Plan Bay Area, the Commission approved a nearly $7.5 billion program over the next 15 years to invest in our core transit system. So in terms of conclusions from Plan Bay Area, where does this leave us? I think that the plan has us on moving in the right direction, but like all regions in California, it will take significant resources to maintain the state of good repair, to make targeted investments in transportation systems, and provide sufficient capacity to serve the communities where growth is going to happen. We also need funding to make the infill housing a reality, and with the loss of redevelopment, that's a significant challenge, and especially affordable housing is really a serious issue throughout the state and a challenge in the Bay Area. And there are really sort of limited, predictable funding options for us to make this a reality. So before I conclude, I also want to note just the challenge of integrating the various planning efforts and the performance measures between the regional, state, and federal efforts. But I'll try to be quick on this. Another effort that's happening, it's not being led at the regional level, it's being led at the state level, is Caltrans is currently leading the effort to update the state's long-range plan called CTP 2040. It is expected to be approved in late 2015. And this plan will provide a common statewide policy framework to guide transportation investments. And it's being closely coordinated with regional planning efforts and also builds on this 3E economy, environment, and equity. And there's 6 goals and 18 supporting policies that the CTP 2040 is building on. And another important element of the CTP 2040 is trying to align, is building on the performance measures from MAP 21, sort of the national goals, and how the goals from the statewide planning effort will align with that. So what I wanted to show with this slide is sort of how these efforts are sort of nested within one another. So if you go in sort of the very center box, you see the performance measures and targets that have already been established for the 4 large MPOs. So there's already a very robust performance measure effort that has been launched with the sustainable community strategies. Sort of right outside of that, we have several efforts that are happening right now with respect to state performance measures. One I just mentioned, the CTP 2040. There's also work from the Strategic Growth Council and also through the programming side, the State Transportation Improvement Program. So really the challenge is how all of these various performance-focused efforts get coordinated. And it's going to be critical so that the efforts are successful and result in more informed planning and investment decision-making. And the challenge will be to ensure that these efforts don't lead to performance exhaustion and just sort of an overwhelming number of performance measures that sort of are confusing to the public and the decision makers. So I think that that's a pretty big challenge ahead for all of us. So in closing, there's a strong and coordinated effort underway to achieve the sustainable communities goals and performance-based planning objectives. I think the lack of financial resources to achieve these goals will likely increase the tension and test the coordination and cooperative relationship at various levels of government going forward. I think there's been unprecedented coordination to date, but that's going to need to continue and expand if we're going to be successful. And I guess just sort of the last thing I would note is I think that the cap and trade funding that we're all expecting really is sort of the first significant test of how well we can all sort of row together in the same direction toward the shared statewide goals that are set forth in the Sustainable Communities Strategy and Climate Protection Act. And that concludes my presentation, and I will either take questions or wait till after Paul. Great.
Sorry, Alex. If you don't mind, we'll do them together. When you're done, we'll do them together. Thank you. Well done, Alex.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity. I'm Paul Parker. I'm Deputy Director with the Washington State Transportation Commission. This is the wrong presentation. So, as it's being found, I hope. How about that? Yes. Alex and Susan Branson and I were talking over the lunch hour, and it appears to me that just as tolling is something that is centralized at the state level in Washington and is much more regional here in California, I think that planning is also structured differently in California and Washington. And so we're hopeful that you may have some comments and questions after I talk. And henceforth as well, my presentation is looking at planning from the statewide level, whereas Susan's was focused on the regional level. So transportation planning, as Susan had already said, and we have some duplication here as well. Federal law requires that there be a statewide transportation plan from every state in the country in order to get federal funding. In addition, in Washington State, the state law requires our Transportation Commission to prepare a statewide transportation plan, something that you all don't have the pleasure of doing. And our statewide transportation plan is based on 6 statutory transportation policy goals, consistent with the state's growth management goals and reflecting the priorities of government set out by the governor's office. The statewide plan also must address regional needs. And I'll be talking back and forth a little bit here about the state's Growth Management Act and its impact on transportation planning as well. Here is a picture of the current Washington Transportation Plan. It's rather slim. It's only about 60 pages long, and it must establish a vision for the development of the statewide transportation system, identify significant statewide transportation policy issues, and recommend statewide transportation policies and strategies to the legislature. So we're required to update this every 4 years, and so we're working on the update currently. DOT also is required to develop a statewide multimodal transportation plan under the guidance of this statewide plan that the Transportation Commission develops, as well as in conformance with the federal requirements. So, back to growth management and how it plays into all of this. The legislature first enacted Washington's Growth Management Act in 1990. Legislators were concerned with both the fiscal and the environmental costs of sprawl. And so they said, we need to do something about this and have better planning done at the city and county level. So 4 of the 13 GMA planning goals I've put on this slide, and I emphasize these 3 because they illustrate the connections between transportation, land use, and the economy that we are all most concerned about. Development in urban areas, reducing sprawl, efficient multimodal transportation systems based on regional priorities, and encouraging economic growth throughout the state. These are 4 of 13 GMA goals. Key to think about, though, here is that GMA is implemented by cities, it's implemented by counties, it's not, in general, required to be implemented by our regional transportation planning organizations or by state agencies. Here's the GMA transportation element. Each city and county has to have this element addressed in its GMA plan. So it shifts the paradigm from transportation infrastructure driving development to land use plans and GMA plans driving where development and infrastructure will occur. The transportation element must implement and be consistent with the land use element. And the transportation element must not only address future needs, but how they will be paid for. So each city and county has to identify in their GMA plan how they're going to pay for the transportation infrastructure that they identify being needed within their jurisdiction. GMA also requires concurrency and consistency. So transportation infrastructure must be provided concurrent with new development, and the city, county, and transit 6-year plans must be consistent with the state's 10-year transportation investment program. In 2005, the Washington legislature added the option of multimodal concurrency so that meeting the concurrency requirement of GMA does not require new roadway. You can meet it in other ways, either by having public transportation, by having walkable communities, a variety of ways. In my opinion, this option of multimodal concurrency is currently underutilized by cities and counties across the state. In addition, GMA also provided cities and counties transportation impact fee authority to raise new revenue to meet the transportation requirements of new development, and made the requirement for regional transportation planning organizations. These are, in just about all of Washington State, consistent with and the boundaries are also pretty much consistent with metropolitan planning organizations. So when I'm referring to regional transportation planning organizations, I'm referring to agencies that are similar to your MTC or SANDAG. In addition, in 2007, the legislature amended the transportation planning statutes that apply to the Commission and our state DOT to require that the statewide transportation plan be consistent with GMA goals. That's why I've been talking so much about the Growth Management Act. So what we do at the Commission level also needs to be consistent with the goals of the Growth Management Act, and in addition with the 6 transportation policy goals for the statewide plan that our legislature has put into statute. I'm not going to read the 6 goals, but I've got them in your slides so that you can take a look at them if you wish. So where are we at today in doing this statewide plan? We decided to have a joint collaborative effort with the State Department of Transportation and with the regional transportation planning organizations. There are 15 of them in Washington across the state. So we have a 3-member steering committee that is tasked with making the policy decision recommendations to the Commission for adoption. That 3-member committee consists of Commissioner Litt, who is chairing the effort on behalf of the Commission, a representative from the Secretary of Transportation representing DOT, and a representative from the state's 15 regional transportation planning organizations. Believe it or not, the 15 of them got together and voted and selected one of their own to represent themselves in this 3-member body. We also have a consultant team working with us, Cambridge Systematics. Our lead consultant is actually housed in Oakland. Burke Consulting, which is a Seattle firm, Alta Planning, which is a Seattle firm, and Natalie Quick Consulting. So our expectation is that this effort will result in one long-range statewide transportation plan that fulfills the 3 different planning requirements that I talked about at the beginning. The federally required plan that each state has to produce, the statewide plan that the Commission is tasked with doing, and the multimodal plan that our state DOT is tasked with. One effort to meet all 3 requirements. We have a broad-based advisory group that we are touching base with. One of the first things that we brought to them was the recommendation from the steering committee, that 3-member group, that our 2035 work be an update on the existing plan. They agreed. They thought that the work that we had done in adopting a plan in 2030 was good work, and that what we ought to do is really identify what's changed, what needs to be addressed, where are the gaps in the existing work. We're doing a lot of outreach. It's broad. It spans demographic and geographic boundaries. We're also asking people in our outreach, how do we pay for keeping the system that we have today? How should we be paying for new infrastructure? And what should we do if additional financial resources are not available? We're asking people, what would you recommend be cut from what we're doing currently in transportation, given the funding situation that we have? So on this slide, this is basically the process that we're following. We have our existing Washington Transportation Plan 2030 strategies organized under those 6 transportation policy goals. We're updating the conditions and trends. We've looked at data. We're getting input from our advisory group. We're using those survey results that Rima and Bill talked about earlier. What do citizens think statewide? We're getting input from various groups, from the business community, environmental organizations, bicycle, pedestrian groups, trucking, rail. We're looking at all of the modal plans that the state has done. We're looking at the regional plans that all of the regions have done. And then that has resulted in us doing a slight modification of our vision statement. We're updating the strategies to identify where those gaps are currently and what's changed and what's new. And then that will bring us to the new plan that we have. The key messages, basically we have 4 key messages. One is that this plan update is only an incremental shift in direction and strategy from where we're going today. Secondly, that economic vitality and quality of life in Washington requires a multimodal transportation system that is safe, well-maintained, and efficient. Third, that the role of the state in multimodal transportation needs better definition, especially when it comes to air transportation, public transportation, and special needs transportation. And then finally, there's a continued strong need for sustainable long-term funding at every level, state, city, county, and transit agencies. So we have some emerging themes in each of these policy areas: economic vitality, more efficiency, maintain and expand flight offerings from our smaller commercial airports across the state, preservation continue a high priority for maintenance and preservation of transportation system components, and sustaining funding sources that can allow us to focus on preservation and save money in the long term by keeping things moving well as they need attention. Safety. This is one of the areas where we feel that we have a real strength already in Washington State, and we just need to continue doing what we're doing pretty much. Mobility, reducing obstacles to multimodal travel, increasing the choices that people have to make any given trip, and working to address the implications of the changing demographics of our state, with younger people having different transportation priorities and a significantly growing older population. Some additional themes in mobility: environment, reducing our impacts on the state's natural environment and decreasing greenhouse gas emissions, and improving the energy efficiency of the entire transportation sector. And this is a good point for me to also add that I think in Washington State, air quality is probably less of an issue for us to deal with on the transportation side than water quality is and habitat. Right now, the state DOT is facing about a $2 billion cost to remove and replace culverts under state roads and state highways to improve passage for fish. And that's a court order. And then finally, the sixth key theme that we have in stewardship: to better integrate land use policy and transportation planning, and to extend mobility and accessibility to all user groups. This is getting at some of the equity issue that was talked about today in some of the tolling presentations and that Alex talked about as well. This is one of the themes that's really emerging as we're working on this process. Our next steps.
Just a heads up, you're 2 minutes left, and
Thanks. So we issued our public review draft of WTP 2035 earlier this month. We're in a public comment period now. We're going to be having 5 public forums across the state. We're going to be doing a couple of webinars as well and testing out that technology as a way to get public input and comment into what we're doing. And by December, we will have revised the plan based on some of those comments, and the Commission will adopt and send the new statewide plan on to the governor and the legislature. When Susan and Alex and I were talking earlier, Susan asked, so then what happens with it? What does it mean? Well, this plan is hopefully going to be used by the legislature in making some of their long-term policy decisions on transportation. I do think that it's the guidance that the Department of Transportation will use as it updates its own plans and updates the statewide plan that's then later submitted to FHWA and FTA to continue state funding. Thank you very much.
Well, you nailed it, Paul. You had 5 seconds left if you wanted to add anything, or we'll just carry that time over. Alex, Paul, thank you for the excellent overviews, both from a regional as well as statewide perspective. I'm going to open it up to Commission colleagues from both states in case they have any questions or comments to either of you. And I see Vice Chair Dunn and Commissioner Assemi on the California side of the border, and we'll start there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Terrific presentations, both of you. Got my brain all excited about a million questions, so I'm only going to ask 2 because the chairman will cut me off. Alex, first, just a top-notch presentation on understanding the basics of SB 375. I really appreciate that. Housing is a huge issue for us in Orange County. I know it is in Silicon Valley. Planning housing and transportation together is really cutting edge. Good luck trying to do that. Under SB 375, we also have the issue of now our regional transportation, our metropolitan transportation agencies are already in the process of preparing their next, after doing their first sustainable community strategies, they're preparing their next round. And yet, San Diego has been sued under their, as the first one out the chute. The court case is still pending. We have all of these hidden issues under CEQA, forget SB 375, that haven't been resolved. How does your group in regional planning reconcile the issue of litigation one, and secondly, that housing incentives under SB 375, except for transit-oriented development, have not produced the results in infill development that we're hoping for. Two big issues. Housing's not yet there, and the litigation. Any thoughts from your regional planning group? I know these are tough questions, but...
And please answer in 3 seconds.
And you have
or
3
less.
seconds.
Yes.
And that's only my first question.
Well, we have Sandag beat in that we got 4 lawsuits filed against our plan. So,
Yeah. Oh, good for you.
we think we did a really good job.
So planning, I mean, litigation is just clearly, for all the plans in the world, we're stuck with litigation still at the California as part of our strategies.
Well, especially, I think you mentioned, do I need to press this down, or can you hear me? Is it working?
Yeah, it's from the AG, too. Yeah.
Okay,
There
maybe
you
that's
go.
better. Okay. Well, I think you kind of hit it with CEQA. I mean, I think that sort of opens us up. I think I tried to make the point, I'm not sure that in Washington, the plans may not be subject to an environmental review. Under federal law, our regional transportation plans wouldn't be required to undergo an environmental review, but in California, we have to subject them to CEQA. So I think that really opens us up to the litigation question. I don't have an answer for you.
Yeah, I know. I was
it
just-
makes the
just making a
planning
point.
process that much harder and more costly.
Yeah.
So I don't have an
That's
answer
okay.
on that.
Sorry, Alex.
And I think on the housing, I tried to make the point that it's a very delicate dance because we're trying to make sure that we can house all of the growth, and yet we are not supposed to usurp local land use authority. So
Right.
I think in our region, what we are trying to do is use our transportation dollars to incentivize and reward the jurisdictions that are willing to plan for and build the housing. I think the challenge is a lot of them, significant number of jurisdictions are willing to plan for it, but actually getting it built in this era of no redevelopment dollars and other challenges, especially the affordable component, is really a challenge. So we don't have the solutions, but we're here to work with everyone in the state to try to make it happen. We hope that the dollars within the cap and trade, the Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities funding component, we hope that that will be a part of the solution, but we think that we have significant challenges ahead on the housing side.
Thank you. And Alex, for Paul, your focus was all transportation, but under your Growth Management Act, your legislative findings talk about unplanned growth. How is your transportation planned with housing, if at all, in Washington?
So that work typically happens at the city planning and the county planning level.
Right.
So what we've done, though, with our statewide effort is we have brought not only cities and counties and transit agencies into our advisory group and our planning work, but we have also included the State Department of Commerce, where the state housing programs, state economic development programs are housed. We've got the State Department of Ecology involved in our planning effort, as well as the Puget Sound Partnership. So we're trying to get all of the key players at the table on this statewide plan. Our planning process in Washington State is sort of like an hourglass shape, where we've got a lot of it happening from the bottom up, and then we've got also some state and federal mandates that come down. And that little place in the center, I think, is where the State Transportation Commission and the statewide plan fits.
Is it producing more housing yet?
I don't know if it's producing more housing, and I don't think that we have a mandate, as you apparently do in California along those lines. But I think what we're seeing happen slowly over time is a better fit of housing and transportation and economic development, particularly in urban areas.
Okay. Commissioner Assemi?
Just briefly, great presentation by both of you. Along the lines of Commissioner Dunn's questions, housing is one of the biggest components of measuring poverty. So how do you, maybe Alex, balance growth well, we would direct your policies and the sustainable communities strategy policies is to direct most of the growth to urban areas. And so to a densification of cities. How do we balance that with affordability and the question of equity as it comes to housing?
Well, the way that the statewide regional housing needs assessment works is that it does provide sort of allocations by income level. So the jurisdictions actually have to sort of, accept through the RENA process that they're going to build housing at these different income levels. I think, so I feel like that process is somewhat working, although some jurisdictions really don't want to accept any housing, much less affordable housing. I think the real challenge is even for those that are willing to, we're trying to reward them with as much money and investment in infrastructure to kind of go with that, but the challenge is really still, there's so many opportunities for that housing not to get built, even once the jurisdiction has said we're willing to plan for it, but just the whole permitting process and all the things that the money, the developers, everything that can go wrong after that, I think is the part that I don't have a solution for you today on that, but that's sort of the challenge that we're confronting in our region. It's sort of really the implementing Plan Bay Area.
The average price of a condo in, I think, San Francisco is $1 million, right? It's about $1,000 a square foot. And somebody that an average income is about $85,000 or $90,000. I mean, there's lots of inequity in that. How do we address that? Or how are you addressing that? Maybe that's a conversation for another day. But
Right. I mean, we have a few things that we're trying to do to address it, but I don't think that Chair Gardino will let me spend the time. So maybe I'll talk to you offline about our transit-oriented affordable housing fund that we have in the Bay Area.
Great.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Alex. Appreciate it. Join us for dinner. You can talk to Darius for hours about that. Are there other questions from either commission? Okay. Seeing none, thank you both. Excellent job. For those of you who are clock watchers, we are precisely on time. I would mention again the WTS reception for all of us this evening is not at the Fairmont. It's at San Jose City Hall, which is about 200 yards from here. And we look forward to all of you joining us at 5:30 for that reception. We're now going to talk about freight, which is something that we have been even more sensitized to thanks to the leadership of Fran Inman on our California Commission staff. So I want to thank her again for her leadership in that regard. And we have both Hassan as well as Ashley to talk to us about freight. As we did earlier, would ask each of you if your presentations were about 15 minutes each. I'll try to help with time, and that allows us to have as much dialogue with you as possible. We still have Craig Scott. Did Craig come back into the room? Oh, Craig is here. Craig, we had called you earlier, but I think you were still at lunch. We do have your speaker card. If you'd like to speak to the commission now, you can. If you'd like to wait till after this presentation, you can. It's really your choice. Great. Craig, and as we had mentioned this morning, we're asking, we believe in a less is more approach, so we're asking any speaker cards, if you could limit it kindly to 3 minutes. I'll help to be good stewards of the time, and whenever your lips start, the clock starts. So thank you.
Great, thanks. Sorry, I think I was about a minute late getting back from lunch. So you run a tight ship. I missed out on my
Not a
first
problem,
chance.
and so you lose that minute,
So I
by the
appreciate-
way. You have now 2.
I just wanted to make a brief comment. This actually goes back to this morning's topic on mileage-based user fees, road user charges. Commissioner Dunn, at the very last comment right before lunch, asked about the Auto Club AAA role. I'm with the Auto Club of Southern California, and she asked about the role of AAA in Washington. And as my understanding, they played a very active role in part of the process up there, and we'd love to play a similar role here in California. I wanted to let you know what our position is on the issue, and particularly the bill that's going through the Senate right now. We are in support of SB 1077, the pilot study in California. I think we, like everyone in the room, share the same concern about the need of finding a solution or a set of solutions to our transportation funding problem so we can provide the infrastructure that we all would like to see. So we're certainly supportive of moving forward on that process. We've heard a laundry list of all the issues that are out there. It's going to be a tough job. But if we don't set up a well-thought-out, comprehensive pilot study to look into the issues and hopefully address them in California, if we don't do that, we're not going to make progress. So we're looking at moving forward on that. In at least the last version of the bill that we saw, there's a task force to help guide the process with a lot of members, including highway user groups like the Auto Club. We'd love to be a member of that group and help in the process. And the one concern I had was, Norma Ortega this morning talked about if the bill fails, there's, an administrative backup plan, so to speak. And I saw a similar set of stakeholders there, but did not see a similar kind of a highway user group component. So hopefully it's not too late to consider that, because we'd love to participate and be helpful in the process if at all possible. So thank you very much. Hope I'm under the 2 minutes.
You are well under the 2 minutes. You get invited back. Thank you again. And if others have question cards, again, they were out front, as well as with our staff by the windows. Feel free to fill out a question card, and we'll make sure to hear from you today. Hassan, welcome.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate being here. I just want to disclose a couple of things. Commissioner Fran Inman gave me a direction, and you don't refuse any direction from the commissioner, that regardless of what meeting you're at, you have to talk about freight. So, and I go to a lot of meetings, and sometimes they don't even relate, but I talk about freight. So luckily today we are talking about freight, goods movement, and we're talking about the experience in Southern California. Just to give you an idea about the region I'm talking about, it's the 6 counties in the south: Los Angeles, Orange County, Riverside, San Bernardino, Imperial, and Ventura. 191 cities, 18.4 million people, the largest port complex in the United States, the 4th largest in the world, 7 airports, and it's fair to say that we do have quite a bit of warehousing facilities that I'm going to go over. So when we talk about this issue, we are talking about a major component of the economic activity in Southern California. Just to give you an idea of how large this is in 2012 is about 392 billion of maritime cargo, about 48 billion of border crossings from San Diego and Imperial County, and 96 billion in international cargo in airports. So you add these together, it's over $500 billion in 2012 alone. 1/3 of the regional economy is dependent on goods movement. To be exact, it's 35%, $249 billion. And oftentimes, and we do appreciate this commission and the state in 2006 when they passed the bond, $2 billion were dedicated to goods movement. And it was done because of the importance of goods movement to the economy and employment in Southern California and the state of California. Obviously, California is the largest U.S. manufacturing center, just behind the SCAG region. And you could see from this chart that manufacturing still plays a significant role in California and in the SCAG region. And that relates very much to the kind of infrastructure and initiatives we're going to have in California. The region has over 1 billion square foot of warehousing. And Fran Inman and her boss owns half of that. Just kidding. Oftentimes people say, well, why do people come to Southern California? And the weather plays a role, but it's much more than that. It is no region in the world that have as many square footage of warehousing. No region in the world have the potential of even adding what's needed, another half a billion square foot of warehousing. And the question is that good or bad? And depends who you ask it to. If you're asking to somebody, Commissioner Dunn, who's suing you in the EIR, they'll say it's very bad. If you're asking somebody who really into creating jobs, and in some regions in the SCAG region, like in the Inland Empire, these regions of 6 million people is totally dependent at the logistics center, totally dependent on the jobs relating to warehousing. And so the challenge for us is there is economic opportunities, but there is also policies that the state level, the regional level, even in this case at the federal level, that need to be there, and unfortunately it's not all there. We're working on it, but it's not all there. We're still a major trade gateway for U.S. You know, there is obviously the Panama Canal expansion. Welcome to Washington State. You know, your ports are advertising, come here, it's free. That's okay. We don't mind that at all. It's a market economy. You can do anything you want. But we still about 48% of the total container traffic in the United States of America. And if you take the West Coast ports, it's about 60%. And you see in this chart, the ports are listed. This is Commissioner Inman's favorite thing. So this is just for you to know that an average person of us consumed about 40 tons of goods every year. 40 tons, to give you a perspective, is you put 13 Lincoln Navigators together, that's how much they weigh. 40% of the goods imported go through the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. About 750 million pair of shoes, so it's very likely if you bought the shoes in Seattle or in Cleveland, Ohio, very likely it came through our ports. I don't know we're infatuated with shoes, but and 70% of the imports that come to the ports even gone now to the rest of the nation. We oftentimes in Washington, D.C., argue that, you know, we are shipping quite a bit to the rest of the nation, and California and Southern California in particular deserve a special attention, because we actually could show that every congressional district in the United States benefits from a seamless movement of goods through the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. We could show by numbers. When we had the strike in the ports, every congressional district benefited from that strike, and you could show it with dollars and cents. Obviously, we always urge our national government, and we still do, that for us to compete globally, we need national policies on freight. And I know Vince is here. Where is Vince? Still here? He's my funder, so I can't say bad things about him. But he's a partner in arguing with us that we do need the national policies. And the good news is there is, and we're going to talk later, I think Commissioner Inman sits in one of the national committees that dealing with this issue. What recommendation do we want to make to the United States Congress vis-a-vis freight? Important issues. But this brings us down to knowing that we all part of this, and we all are going to hopefully be part of the solution. This is a forecast of 20-foot equivalent containers that come through the ports. In 2013, about 14.6 million. Right now, we're around 15.8. Expected to go, and this is a lowered forecast from the port. This is a capacity-constrained forecast, to about 38.2 million in 2035. Now, if you look at unconstrained demand forecast, there are some forecasts as high as 60 million annual in 2035. The question is, can our infrastructure handle even 38.2? And when we started the discussion of the expansion of the Panama Canal, you know, everything is relative. You know, at one point, a few years back, people called up to SCAG and said, you know, we're hearing a rumor there's going to be a port in Mexico to compete with our ports. And I really didn't take this very seriously. It might be plans for a port in Mexico, but with these volumes, you need to worry about accommodating the volume today and the infrastructure needed, and you're going to see there's challenges in providing those infrastructures. This is just a chart showing the growth rate of cargo. Obviously, containerized is about 350 million by 2030, an increase of 6%, etc. But the growth in port activities led to a huge growth in the number of trains that cross our space in Southern California. Between the two railroads, we have about 100 trains a day in the tracks. And we're going to talk a little bit later. That's creating a lot of problems for grade crossings, traffic waiting for the trains to pass. So grade crossing is a big issue in the region. In the map, you see these different freeways. I hope you never have to drive it during truck peak traffic. But right now, for example, take the 710, you have about 24,000 trucks daily. That's expected to go to 53,000. 60 freeway, another busy, 55,000 trucks daily. Now, when you look at the California transportation traffic counts, trucks is about 5% of the traffic. But they do occupy about 15 to 20% of the capacity. And in the Google presentation, which we're very interested in it, we think technology is going to play a major role. And I know one of the commissioners asked the question, how soon this is going to be. Obviously, for trucks, which uses the freeway quite often without signal lights, the technology is more promising, actually. There is a technology right now being tried. And let me tell you just a simple calculation. If you were to use driverless trucks, you're automatically quadruple the capacity without pouring any concrete. I mean, and this is, to me, is really how we're going to quadruple the capacity of the freeway system that the nation invested in, California invested in. Technology is going to play a role. Now, are we ready to use it? Is it going to be there by 2040? I'm not sure. That's for Google to answer. Say that? Driverless truck, yes. So is it going to be there in 2040? I don't know. But frankly, if I were to be a bidding man, I would say we're not going to see another freeway in the traditional sense of building a freeway by 2040, but we might see an increased capacity by 2040, and we need to look at that very seriously. And I appreciate the Commission's leadership in this being innovative. This is just to give you an idea of the delay at grade crossings because of the number of trains. And remind you that our commuter rail system share the tracks with the freight rail. And the delay is going to go up overall by about 270% between now and 2035. And that's why grade crossings throughout Southern California is very much needed. Obviously, there is air quality concerns and challenges. There is a quality of life issues. Goods movement is responsible for nearly 50% of the regional nitrogen oxide, 50%. And that comes from light duty, heavy duty, locomotives, trains. And so this issue is an important issue, especially for communities that live near the ports. And we have a good story to tell of the progress we made when it comes to cleaning up the trucks. But by far, goods movement and the air quality have to be dealt with. Some of the programs, projects that we proposed over the last many years and for the next few years is a program that we arrived at with all the county commissions, with all the stakeholders. It's about $70 billion worth of projects. One major one is what we call the East-West Freight Corridor. It's building two truck lanes each direction on the 710 coming from the port going north to the 60, east where most of the warehousing is, on the 60, and 15 going north toward Nevada. 600 lane miles, $26 billion, assumed to be tolled. I know earlier people were talking about toll roads. I think it holds a great promise. I think we need to get with the program. We need to stop saying have bad experience. We have good experiences in tolling in Southern California that, I don't have time to present it to you today, but the data speaks for itself. And look, the public sector is not in the business of making money. The public sector should be in the business of providing public services. Tolling is a way to manage congestion, provide public services, generate revenue, reinvest it in the system. So when people judge, the public sector going to make money, that's not the goal of the public sector. And I think these getting bad raps, but the data is there to say tolling could work. Port access programs, freight rail capacity issues, grade separation, as I mentioned, truck mobility issues. Those are projects that must be there if we were to maintain our economic competitiveness for the next 20 years. And they total about $70 billion. This were submitted to the state of California. I know the Department of Transportation, and I know Mr. Anis here, Brian is here. We're submitting that to them so that hopefully be submitted to the national government.
Hassan?
Yes.
While it has been 15 minutes, this is so important. Why don't you take 5 more? Can you do it in 5?
Sure. I just, for disclosure, we were told a little bit more, but I will take 5.
Oh, good. Because the balance of the time, we're not ending early. We're just going to have more time for conversation.
5 minutes it is, sir.
Great. Thank you.
Just want you to know there's a lot of collaboration going on. I just want to mention something called Alameda Corridor implementation. This was, at the time, was the biggest public work projects in the United States. 1.2 billion, a lot of people here, I know Supervisor Burke, Commissioner Burke was involved in it. It started in 1980 by a planner at SCAG. His name is Gil Hicks and Jim Gosnell. They got together and they said, we need to do something about these 4 lines coming from the ports. That led to creating a committee, a collaboration. 25 years later, we had a project that deemed to be very successful. What are the lessons from that project? One is if you're a planner, you might die before you see your planning work in a place. Fortunately, in this case, we saw it. Actually, our economist, led by Dr. Ward Wallace from Orange County Business Council, estimated that a major infrastructure project in California takes about 17 years to complete. It's a shame. And he did, with his colleagues, a calculation that if we accelerate that by just 5 years, the economic impact and benefits will be in billions of dollars. So we need to do something. And there were a question earlier about CEQA. I still don't understand why regional agencies like ours have to do an EIR on the regional transportation plan when you're going to have to do the EIR on the project again. Just to give somebody a time to sue, like San Diego, like MTC. But anyways, that's a different totally topic. So a lot of collaboration taking place, a lot of collaboration needed. I believe collaboration is the key to making things happen. We had an MOU that's signed by California, the state of California, the federal government, the regional agencies to do all of this. But let me just conclude by saying this. Obviously, freight is very important to the economy of California and to the region. Technology is going to play a great role in freight. We have done programs to clean up the air, voluntary programs by the ports, cleanup programs. We have quite a bit of successful tolling program where trucks shouldn't use the system in the peak. But I urge you to, as leaders in California, to understand that the impact on California for making sure the goods flow flawlessly is huge. It's in the billions of dollars, in the hundreds of thousands of numbers of jobs. Thank you for having me. I appreciate your presentation.
Hassan, excellent as always. By the way, you left 90 seconds on the table.
Go back and redo
Ashley Probart, thank you for joining us. Thanks for coming down from Washington State.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. Again, I'm Ashley Probart, and I'm the director of the Freight Mobility Strategic Investment Board. And I've said this before, but I always feel like I'm in front of the principal a little bit because Commissioner O'Neill was the first chair of the FMCIB board, and then with Fran and working with my former boss, Karen Schmidt, I know that any deviation from the truth will be quickly corrected. So with that, I'll begin. Like I said, I'm the director for FMCIB, as we like to call ourselves, because saying Freight Mobility Strategic Investment Board is a little too much of a mouthful. But in short, our mission is to identify and recommend investments that improve and mitigate freight movement on strategic corridors, grow jobs in the economy, and bolster Washington State as a leader in international trade. And we consider ourselves in Washington as the most trade-dependent state of the 48 continental states. The other thing that we are not advertised as much as we should be is that we also try to lessen the impact of freight on local communities because, as we all know, freight tends to pass through a lot of small communities. They don't necessarily see the benefit of freight movement. So with that, we're a 12-person board, and I'll touch on that in a second. But I did want to touch on a couple of milestones. Hassan had just brought up the Alameda Corridor, and in about 1996, both key members of Washington State DOT and legislators went down and did a tour, and that was a big wake-up call. Ports were also involved. So that, I would say, is probably the genesis of FMCIB today. So don't think of it as plagiarism. Think of it as an homage as far as we're concerned up here. But so that was a wake-up call, and in 1998, the legislator created a freight agency, and it was also time for Next T, the Federal Highway Act, because we had good radar that a lot of freight funding was going to be coming our way. And then in 1999, the agency was completed, had staff, and I'll skip the rest of them, but I think what's the most important here that you don't see in the milestones question is, why was FMCIB created? What were the threshold decisions as to why have the agency in the first place? And as I mentioned, we're the most trade-dependent state, but the stakeholders themselves force the issue, and that means ports, rail, the trucking industry, maritime industry. And basically the question was, does freight for Washington State warrant a separate agency or not? And can the Department of Transportation effectively advocate for freight when they've got mission creep of having to deliver on mega projects, earthquake retrofit at the time, and then there was that fundamental shift in Washington State, as Paul Parker touched on, where Washington State had become a bottoms-up growth state and planning organization. So where would the focus on freight lie if everything was bottoms-up, but we were looking nationally and internationally? So in the end, the legislature did choose to create FMCIB as a separate agency. So those are our members. We're a 12-person board. It's a balance of cities, counties, east and west, port representation, large and small. We have a public member who's usually private sector. We have two railroads, Burlington Northern, and because Union Pacific is officially headquartered in Portland, they're ex officio. And as I shared, we also have maritime representation and representation from both governor's staff and the Department of Transportation. We do not have a lot of money. We get about $12 million per biennium. It comes in two colors. One is road money, so it's exclusively for road projects, and the other is what we call multimodal money, which we can blend for at-grade crossings and things like that. And we have some other monies that come and go throughout the years. So as I've already mentioned, we advocate for strategic freight transportation projects and focus on timely construction and leverage funding from public and private stakeholders. Typically, for about every dollar we put in, we tend to leverage another $4 to $5 of other funding to get a project completed. I will just stop on this one, the second bullet. One of the things I've learned in the past year since I've had this position is how much of a sounding board we are both at the state and federal level for freight policy. And I'd say that's one of our strengths is we can be perceived as unbiased or at least balance the pros and cons between the various modal advocates and what's good state or federal policy. A role of the board, as I mentioned, they're appointed by the governor. They're basically volunteering their time. And what I've seen is one of their strongest strengths is they're all professionals. There have been executives in their past or current lives, and they have tremendous expertise they bring to the table. And one of the things I like the best is that whenever a project or an issue is debated, they check their modal interest at the door to the extent that how do we raise the whole boat? How do we make Washington State better? And so that, I think, is absolutely their strength. And they place a strong emphasis on when a project or a policy is presented that it helps remain competitively neutral. Again, it's advancing Washington State, not pitting one mode against the other. And then in my day job, a lot of what we do is broker agreements between various agencies and partners to keep everybody at the table, and also support providing federal funding advocacy, and that's code for supporting Tiger grants. Partnerships, our reality is that it takes 4 to 6 partners on average to get a freight project pulled off. If we were to get more money, our estimate is that that would maybe drop off one partner and maybe shave a year or two off of a project coming together. But until then, that tends to be the way things are. The other thing we have to do is a lot of major project integration, because working with cities and counties and others, it's a foreign concept on how all these things come together between rail, trucking, et cetera. So that's a big part of our role. And we've had challenges. When we were first created, there was $100 million that was set aside for the agency on a biennial basis, and then promptly the initiative process took over and eviscerated $800 million out of a $2.5 billion budget, $100 million of which was Freight Mobility Board, and the ferries were pretty much wiped out at the same time. So for a couple of years it was just piecemeal funding, but now, as I said, we do have a dedicated fund source. A continuing challenge is the Department of Transportation also has a freight interest, and so there's always a natural tension that comes with that. And then, as we all know, we've got a lot of jurisdictions where freight simply passes through, but what's in it for them? Oops, let's go back. Like I said, one of the strengths is high-level input from the board, and we have tremendous stakeholder support and advocacy, and I'll get to cost increases in a moment. The other thing that's one of our strengths is we're extraordinarily transparent. We're very clear on what our projects are and what they deliver, and I'll give a couple of examples on that in a moment. One of the things I mentioned is that one of our challenges is, as a small agency, we're constantly being looked at is why can't we be consolidated with others? And there was a legislative state study on that a few years ago, and they found us to be incredibly efficient and validated basically why PHMSA's been created. So there will not be a Rorschach test on this in a few minutes, but we do have a project selection process. And the way that's put together in short is we do it in almost like a blind test. The board reviews the project submittals and a technical team does independently. Then we compare notes, and that's what I would say gets you to the starting point for a discussion on whether the project's truly a freight benefit project. And one of the strengths that I've seen, and this is I've found a little unique in my previous careers, I haven't seen this anywhere else, is that when the board awards a project, they set a dollar threshold of, say, a $10 million award. But if the project comes in, say, 20% below cost estimates, we realize 20% of that savings at the end of the day. So we have a bookended protection for the board as well as the opportunity to recover some costs or funds. And in the past few years with the low bid climate, that's allowed us to reinvest in other projects. I've touched on this a fair amount already, but like I said, the process goes beyond the numbers scored. We find that mostly when a lot of these projects are ultimately awarded, it's based on the professional input of the board and the technical scores of physically walking the projects or seeing what's really good for the industry. The project scoring criteria, it's a little tricky. It's 198 points. Nobody can get 198 points because some benefit rail, some are targeted for trucking or at-grade crossings. But as you can see, it's a heavy emphasis on freight mobility, not just for the project area, but how does it benefit the state, the region, or potentially nationally. We clearly take into account general mobility and safety. Environment's becoming more of an emerging issue. On the other hand, whenever you remove a freight bottleneck, it's a huge win for the environment, so it's a pretty easy story to tell. And again, because of the Growth Management Act, we're very careful that it's consistent with regional and state plans. The other thing I would just share is whenever the private sector participates, they get twice the scoring as part of the application as a public sector partner. And that's a way to help incentivize perhaps the Class 1 railroads or other private sector developers. We also have city and county partners, and they rely on street funds, regional funding through their metropolitan planning organizations, local taxes. The ports have their own taxing authority as well as other means of funds, so they're pretty active in this process. And then federal competitive funds are also something that's a frequent participant. So in our 15-year history, we've completed 48 projects, 150 million of FMCIB money, leveraged another 640, and right now we have about another 30 active projects that are in play that should be done on a rolling 6-year basis. So there they are. Sorry for the small dots, but we are required by statute to be regionally balanced between Puget Sound, Eastern and Western Washington. And I thought it'd be better and more entertaining to actually talk about a couple of projects. So as a refresher, for Washington State, we have about $40 million in freight that's on our roads every hour. And this has been touched on before. We're huge on grain exports on the West Coast. We've talked about Port of Seattle and Tacoma. We're number 2. We're proud of that. We know we can't be number 1 just yet unless we quadruple our population. And I did want to mention the other Apple, besides Apple computers. Last year, for the first time ever, Washington State produced over $2 billion in apples. And that's about half the nation's Apple output. So getting apples out of the market into the other 47 states or 49 states is a big deal for us. So 2 example case studies I wanted to talk about is Port of Vancouver, just north of Portland along the Columbia River. They handle 5.6 million metric tons annually, but one of the things I wanted to draw your attention to is they're unique in that they have 15% imports and 85% exports. Things just leave the Midwest and off they go. So for the Freight Mobility Board, we were approached about 6 years ago because the way the rail lines intersected the city and were coming into the port, it was backing up city traffic, it was causing rail problems for Burlington Northern and slowdowns, and the Port of Vancouver approached us for partnering on a single loop track inside of their footprint. And they have about 800 acres of property, I believe. So by doing that, putting that in, it freed up Burlington Northern. They had something like a 30 to 40% increase in speed along that segment of rail. But it also, inside the Port of Vancouver, has generated about another $275 to upwards of $500 million in increased investment over the past decade. And in my estimate, every time I go out there, I keep calling it Little Chicago West because they keep adding and adding, and I'd say the sky's the limit. In about 6 years, they could actually start rivaling Port of Seattle and Port of Tacoma when you start looking at some of their bottom line issues. So here's some examples of some expansion that we've seen in the past 4 or 5 years. United Grain, $80 million by way of example. Far West Steel, $50 million. And this does not include some of the other things that are coming through as a result of the Bakken oil fields or coal. Now, the other one I want to share with you is in central Washington, and this is all about apples. What you see there, that white, is actually the top of a warehouse. And when I get to this is Washington Apple and Produce. They had an issue, and you can see the red lines. It's a little 2-lane county road. And what was happening there is that you can see the apples are coming in, but they were queuing up into the city, and they were having trouble loading and unloading. So what we did is they approached us. We put in about $600,000. They put in about $300,000 on the private sector side, and the city put in another $500,000 on the opposite side to help with a VOTEC school. And we put in this 2-way left turn lane. And that might not look particularly exciting until you look at it from this context. They first put in the $30 million cold storage facility. Now they're going to be able to, I think, double that in the next couple of years. But in terms of their production, 7 days a week, 20 hours a day, they're doing 4 million apples per day in terms of packaging. And that's 70 to 85 refrigerated containers daily. They're loading a truck every 8 minutes before this project. After this project, now they're loading a truck every 6 minutes. So when you multiply that out, that's a pretty phenomenal growth for just a little bit of private sector and public sector investment. But these are many of the types of projects that we tend to fund. I'm going to switch to my last topic here, which is the State Freight Advisory Committee. For those of you that are intimate with MAP 21, for the first time ever, there's a legitimate, what I'd call, freight component. And unique to that is establishing a freight advisory committee and then spelling out who's on it. In my 20-plus years of transportation, that was a first. But typically, departments of transportation are leading that effort. In our case, we have a joint agreement with the Department of Transportation that our agency is leading that because 2/3 of our board already met the statutory requirement, and we felt we were both best equipped to do that. We also added metropolitan planning organizations, tribes, maritime labor, and an environmental component. And our goal and our responsibility is to advise the State Transportation Commission as they put together Vision 2040, as Paul Parker was talking about, as well as the Department of Transportation when they compile the entire freight plan and turn it over to USDOT. So I've already touched on that. So after a year of meeting, we came together and put out our document in May of this year. There it is. And what I wanted to say that I thought were the strengths of it is that we really focused on trends and policies at a high level from the industry point of view. And one of the things we found is we had FedEx come and speak to us. And the reason FedEx spoke to us is because when I reached out to Amazon and many of the other big distributors, they said, whatever FedEx's problems are our problems, so listen to them. So that was one of the outcomes of this. But we had trends and policies in each of these 4 modal areas. And I know this is tiny print, and I'm certainly not going to go through it, but I just wanted to point out that one of the things that I found was interesting is each mode had something to say usually about planning and funding and investment. And one that came out with the airports is just outside of Puget Sound Regional Council, maybe 4 or 5 other places in the country, there's very few MPOs that have a bona fide seat for aviation or air cargo logistics at the table. On ports and inland waterways, one of the ones that I thought was really compelling is that between Oregon, California, and Washington, all 3 states leapfrog one another on their environmental permits when it comes to water. Some are on a 5-year cycle, some are on a 10-year cycle. But from a port point of view, that results in some competitive disadvantages for all 3 states, and Canada really likes it when we do that. So that's one of the takeaways I learned from that. Another thing, we have land use components as part of Growth Management Act, and what I would expect to see is the port element of city comprehensive plans being strengthened so you can protect industrial lands as it relates to ports. That's one of the things I'm hoping that comes out of it. Moving on to rail, because they're mostly federal, there wasn't a whole lot of things on the state side that came about. But one thing that's already been touched on is that we need to have a systematic way of addressing at-grade crossing needs in Washington State. We have at least $1 billion problem there and not a systematic way to address it. On state trucking, one of the issues that's come up consistently is what to do. Is there a better way to define what's called heavy haul corridors and put investment in key strategic roads and city streets rather than trying to invest in multiple streets without a lot of success? The last 2 things I'd share on the state plan or the Freight Advisory Committee document is DOT did a tremendous amount of inventorying for many of the statutory requirements for MAP 21. But our advisory committee picked off 2 areas. One was at-grade rail crossings, and I've mentioned that. We just focused on urban areas, and with a partial list came up with over $1 billion in needs. That's probably half. It's probably off by 50%. Once we finish our inventory and have costs for those, I'd expect that number to double. And then the other thing is, what's the definition of first and last mile connectors? We found that was extraordinarily challenging in the eye of the beholder. But as a first cut, what we basically looked at is which corridors met our FMCIB tonnage criteria in terms of 4 million tons or more on certain roads, and we used that to back into some screens. And based on that, that still identified at least 47 projects in Washington State and counting. As I mentioned, DOT had already done weight-restricted roadways and structurally deficient and functionally obsolete bridges.
Ashley, if you could
Last
do
slide.
About 2 more minutes.
Last slide.
Oh, you are good.
I'm on it.
Thank you.
So,
see, that's because freight arrives on time.
There you go.
Yeah.
So for some final comments and observations on the Freight Advisory Committee, one of the takeaways that I would hope both the California and Washington Commission can confirm is that there needs to be an active Freight Advisory Committee at the state level, and it needs to be consistent nationally. I think that's just one of the things we keep seeing over and over again. The other aspect is just a common definition of a freight project, so we know what we're talking about and can compete fairly. And then the last thing I would just say on that is that as a Freight Advisory Committee, we intentionally acknowledge freight or preservation and maintenance as mission critical for the transportation system, but we did not pull preservation and maintenance through the knothole of freight funding because we thought it would overwhelm it, and that the Department of Transportation, the state, are better served addressing that funding need elsewhere. So at the end of the day, our job is to have champions from all 4 caucuses in order to continue funding freight. Thank you.
Ashley, well done. Hassan, great job. If you both, first, will you all join me in thanking Ashley and Hassan? And we wanted to leave time for as much conversation as the commission's desired. And again, we want to engage members of the public. If you want to comment or have a question for Ashley or Hassan, please just feel free to fill out a card. I think that might be Commissioner O'Neill's mic, but it's hard to tell from this angle.
It is.
Great, thank you. And then Commissioner Tortorelli, correct? Hey, don't worry, I always get Italian names right. It's a brotherhood. All right. And then looking this way at the California delegation? Well, we'll start with Washington then. Commissioner O'Neill?
Well, I just want to observe that one of the key, or maybe the two key improvements that the Freight Mobility Board provides in the state of Washington is leverage and coordination. I mean, the whole objective here is to try to get as many of the players together as possible, and with a relatively small amount of money, leverage that with state, local, private money, and federal money. Of course, some of the federal money has dropped off, and I think one of the key, as you both have mentioned, keys to freight mobility, one of the keys is doing something about grade crossings. And there's been an effort up in the state of Washington between the cities of Tacoma and Everett, which is basically a Puget Sound corridor, to do that. But with the federal money dropping off, it's made it difficult to move very far. And although L.A. Long Beach just pretty much is huge compared to the state of Washington, you still have some of the same issues, and while these ports are competitive, at least there might be a common ground that we could all support. But this is, it's hard to find money right now, at least at the federal level. So how this comes about is difficult to say unless, as I think you mentioned, there's good collaboration amongst these groups.
Just a couple of comments on the money side. In the 1970s, 80s, we used to get in the SCAG region about 80% federal money and 20% state and regional. Right now, today, in the SCAG region, we get 72% locally generated sales tax money, about 13% federal, and about 16% state. So things shifted. We still hope that this national bill that we've been waiting for a while, the National Transportation Bill, that for the first time it will have a freight dedicated funding, and there is a bipartisan support for that. So we would hoping that the federal government finally is going to put something in the bill to that effect.
Commissioner Tortorelli?
Well, I had a question for both of you, is that I'm happy to see that the USDOT is now starting to put some emphasis on freight mobility. They actually created a committee that they're going to actually study it. So I come with 30 years of experience in doing economic development. And I'm amazed that every time I go to the Puget Sound area, the amount of truck traffic that's just stopped on our freeways, which I relate that to productivity and the movement of freight. That's millions and millions of dollars of lost economic activity in our region. Have you been able to quantify that?
In our region, yes, absolutely. And I can tell you right now that the amount lost due to productivity loss for delay, just to delay alone, is about $1.7 billion annually in the SCAG region. That's just the delay to the crossings, the trucks, the port, etc. So, and I'm sure this is an underestimate. The problem is, I have to be careful how I say this. Facts don't always translate into let's do something about it. I think collaboration is a good word for doing something. Alameda Corridor, which combined 4 railroads, took many agencies, public-private partnerships all together, took a long time to do, and more of that need to happen to overcome these issues.
Yeah. Ashley.
Well, Commissioner Tortorelli, I don't have the numbers, but I know we do, the Department of Transportation and others do quantify that delay, and we can get to that pretty quickly because we know how much of congestion is just general purpose traffic and what percentage are trucks, and we can get a quick number on that. But at the end of the day, I think we're all just stuck until we can come up with a systematic investment plan to pick some of those key bottlenecks off, and we all know what the lists are. We've had them for a long time.
Good. Thank you.
And it looks like no one from California wants to speak. No one wants to speak on this. No. Why don't we, good, Vice Chair Dunn would like to speak.
I just think Ashley gets an award for making the last presentation of a very long day, and great information, great detail, and thank you very, very much for doing that. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm prepared to make a motion to adjourn.
Okay. Commissioner Inman, would you mind trying to think of something to ask about?
Hey, I want to ask how the pistachios from Central California are going to get to market.
Darius hand delivers those, by the way.
We need to work on a more aggressive goods movement plan to deliver the close to $40 billion of ag products that come out of the valley. $6 billion out of Fresno County and about $7 out of Tulare County. Wow. Pistachios and almonds of the entire U.S., most of Europe, and almost all of Asia come from Central California. So we have to work on a better program on getting these goods out of the valley and into the ports and into the rest of the country and the rest of the world. So we're hoping to work with you and on a goods movement plan. And I have a comment before we adjourn, after Commissioner Inman.
Absolutely. Let me just recognize mics of Commissioner Inman, Commissioner Assimi, and I thought I had seen Commissioner Madafers as well. Great. In that order, then. Fran?
I just want to say thank you to my colleagues on both commissions for including freight on the agenda. As you all know, I spend a lot of time in my day job looking at studying the global supply chain, and it is absolutely fascinating to me, and I'm totally convinced that we will not achieve our sustainable community strategies if we don't do a good job figuring out how we're going to get the goods to our businesses and to our residents. And unfortunately, if we do a good job, we're invisible, and everybody just assumes, like I do, on Saturday that we can run down to Target and it will automatically be there. The supply chain is a huge, imperfect market littered with intermediaries, and we have a gazillion partners that are all part of this amazing puzzle that we all try to put together. I think what's particularly interesting times for all of us, and we haven't even touched on it here, except Hassan and I have had a lot of good conversations in the past about e-commerce and the changing world of retail, and what does that mean for all of our transportation planners and our urban planners, because the world is changing quickly. We had good discussions earlier today about technology, and if you just think about the online shopping and what does that mean with vehicle miles traveled and all of that. So I would just encourage you all to join us on this journey of figuring out what our combined future will be, and I am hopeful and confident that whenever we see a new bill from the feds back there, Vince, that there will be a freight component. If you look at the administration's proposal, freight clearly has a significant role in recognition, not only in figuring out what would our national strategic freight plan look like, but how would we fund it. And I think it's important for all of us, and I think also on the Senate side, clearly MAP MAP 21 laid the groundwork, but we all knew it was just the groundwork. So there's lots of work left to be done, but thank you both.
Commissioner Inman, thank you. Commissioner Assimi?
Thank you, Chair. I want to take a minute and thank our Chair, Gardino, our Executive Director, and our staff at CTC, and also the Washington staff and Washington commissioners, along with my fellow colleagues here. It was a great presentation and a great day with incredible amount of information. As Fran put it very well, this is a changing world, and we are very excited to be part of this conversation on how e-commerce and goods movement and SCS and affordability and equity and economy and transportation and mobility all come together. We have to be very mindful. This was probably one of the best workshops I've attended ever. Very informative, very collaborative, very multidisciplinary, and I hope that this is just the beginning of a dialogue, Mr. Chair. And hopefully a few lessons learned on how to collaborate and help us advance into the 21st century. Thank you.
Darius, thank you. We really appreciate your leadership. We're going to go to Commissioner Medaffer, then we're going to go to Chair Haley and to Commissioner Jennings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First to Hassan, just thank you very much. That presentation you gave should be required for every member of the California legislature. I mean, clearly the backbone of our state's economy, and frankly, this country relies so much on what goes on in and around our goods movement. So I look forward to partnering with Commissioner Inman and other members of the Commission as we work with the MPOs and everybody in trying to figure out ways to foster this crucial aspect of our economy. And then I just want to echo Commissioner Semi's comments. This has been an absolutely wonderful program today. I thank the staffs that were responsible for putting this together. A big takeaway for me on the user charge in the future is a five-state idea at some point. I think as we go in California, as Oregon and Washington go, eventually the rest of the country will follow. And I don't think there's ever going to be a situation where we're going to be able to rely on just one funding source. It's very clear to me that there's always going to be some form of a gas tax. There's always, until there's no more internal combustion engines, there's always going to be some form of weight fees. So there's got to be a multitude to solve our transportation infrastructure dilemma. And again, I just want to say thank you for the incredibly wonderful educational day today. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Medaffer. We're going to go to Commissioner Jennings, and if I don't see any other lights, would love to close with Chair Haley.
I just wanted to thank the California commissioners for hosting this. You in the audience, I know that you sat there most of the day, but without you, we couldn't do our job. So I wanted to thank everybody for hosting and being out here today.
Thank you, sir. With that, Chair Haley.
I, too, would like to thank you for this invitation. It was very worth our time to join with you, and that it's evidence of the increased depth and breadth of presentations that we can accomplish collaboratively. And it's not just a formal presentation, it's the conversations that we had over coffee and over lunch, which have pointed out our commonalities and our differences and our challenges of working together. So we hope that this is not the first or the second or the end of collaborative meetings, but we certainly would issue an invitation to the California Commission if you might wish to meet in Washington State, or if we can even hope to include Oregon and meet midpoint in Portland. That would even be an advantageous meeting at some point in the future when we have more to report to each other on the accomplishments that we have outlined and listened to today. So thank you very much, Chair Gardino. It's our pleasure to be here.
Don't worry. Your colleague, Commissioner Tortorelli, will help you to pronounce Guardino. correctly. By the way, I just want to make sure that we heard Chair Haley correctly. Meeting at the midpoint is actually in Maui. It's a geography thing, but we'll work with you on that.
You're good at triangulating.
I am. I'm going to ask Rima Griffith, Andre Boutros, and Susan Branson to stand. They worked so diligently to put this together, and with all our presenters. I would have said, let's all stand, but after 9 hours of sitting, all the circulation has left my legs, so I'm not sure I can. This has been really terrific. We try to start and end on time and respect your time, but there's nothing wrong with ending a few minutes early. Executive Director, do we have any speaker cards that we need to address?
No, we do not.
Okay. Then take the next 32 minutes off because the WTS reception is only about 200 yards away at San Jose City Hall. Thank you all for joining us. We are adjourned.